Yes, you have what it takes. Hi, my name is Katie, and today my goal is to inspire all of you Catholic and Christian homemakers who are striving to achieve these virtuous characteristics. So the question is, what are these virtuous characteristics? Well, let's talk about it. Okay, so the first virtuous characteristic that I want to talk about is refraining from gossip, which is actually what inspired me to make this whole post. Lately, my husband and I have been having a lot of conversations around this, and partially because it's Lent and we're trying to do our best to be the best versions of ourselves. But also, there's been times in the past where this is what I personally gave up for Lent, and I have to tell you, it was very challenging. Not because I'm talking smack about a lot of people, but because it was hard to discern what actually made something gossip versus just communicating a particular issue about a person. So like, for example, when I gave up gossiping years ago for Lent, I was working, and there was one particular situation where I had a coworker that was wronged by another coworker, and they were telling me what happened. And so being on the receiving end of that, hearing what went down, my coworker was obviously wronged. So the question is, how do I initiate in that particular conversation where I am supporting my coworker and letting them know that they're not crazy, that they were in fact wronged, but by also not really putting a bad light, I guess you could call it, on the other coworker that wronged them, because, in a way that kind of feels like it's gossiping. And so at some point, I kind of thought to myself, going through all this, trying to discern what makes something gossip and what doesn't, that gossip really is when it's basically defined off of the motive behind the person initiating in that act. Granted, I am no therapist, I'm no, professional in this matter, but for me personally, this is my rule of thumb. And so, for example, if you go to someone and you are voicing a concern or something that you went through, and you're trying to get either advice or feel validated in what you went through, then that's not gossip. And vice versa, if someone is coming to you and you're trying to support that person. On the other hand, if you are talking negatively about someone or sharing a new piece of information because you now have this new nugget of information that you heard about from, someone else, and you're doing it almost to kind of expose that person, then that I would consider to be gossip. So for this to really work, you need to self-reflect and really consider what your motives are behind bringing up this information and talking to someone about someone. And it can especially be challenging for those repeat offenders that we have in our lives. We have them all. I mean, we're all human. We're all going to have people that we just simply do not get along with. So I guess if you are thinking about talking about that person, ask yourself, what purpose does bringing this piece of information up serve? And does this person need to know this information? And also, is this person that you're telling it to mature enough to handle it? Because I firmly believe that gossip flourishes when you tell someone who is immature and handles it improperly, i.e. that being they're judging the other person or they're spreading it themselves. You almost have to look at it as you're not only hurting the person that you are gossiping about, but you're also hurting the person that you're gossiping to, especially if they do not handle it well. So that's the first one that I wanted to talk about. The next virtuous characteristic that I want to talk about is surrendering it up to God. And this has also been another theme of my personal life lately, and it truly is amazing how we almost kind of self-sabotage ourselves. We hold on to things, we hold on to problems, we think that we can solve everything because we are independent and can do it ourselves, but this simply is not the case. We need God. We cannot do it without God. So whatever problems you have, just surrender it to God, just give it to God. And this actually happened to me 3 different occasions of recently. And so what I did in my prayers, I was just like, God, X, Y, Z is bothering me. I cannot do anything about it. Like, I need your help. I'm just giving it all to you. However, the outcome is, like, I'm just fully surrendering this particular topic to you. Do with it as you will. And within 24 hours, each three of those things was resolved. And so it's kind of amazing if you just let go and let God, things will just fall into place and just make sense. The next virtuous characteristic that I want to talk about is humility. And I think when people think of humility, they think of like bragging and stuff, like about themselves. And that part is definitely true. To be humble, you don't partake in bragging about oneself, but I definitely feel like there's more to it. Like, it goes deeper. And so in my mind, humility and confidence, they're kind of intertwined. There's a lot of overlap. Like, to be humble and to have confidence, there's this level of like trust almost, like you know exactly where you stand and you don't really need to shout it from the rooftops. So with that said, I feel like a part of being humble is accepting the fact that A, I'm not perfect and I have my flaws, and B, neither are my brothers and sisters. And hoping for the grace that they will accept my flaws, the moments where I'm less than, and vice versa, where I will accept those moments where they're less than, or they have a moment that they're less than graceful. And expanding on that, I feel like there's something to be said about the assumption of what other people think. We live in a very opinionated world, and I find it's so easy to try to assume what other people think and what their opinions are to kind of get a handle or even like control on a particular situation. And I find, like, in myself or with other people that I've talked to, a lot of times we do this because there's some underlying deep wound or thing that happened of our past that kind of makes us insecure in this way, and that's why we assume what other people think. So, like, to give an example, if you grew up in a household that supported having a work ethic to the point that it was kind of unhealthy, like your whole life revolves around your work ethic, as an adult, you could very well struggle with assuming that other people think that you're lazy or that you're not doing enough, when it's probably far from true. So as a homemaker, strive to be humble enough to know that you're not perfect, I'm not perfect, Joe Schmo down the street isn't perfect, we're all a whole bunch of imperfect people. And if you do struggle with assuming what other people think, be confident enough to know that these are assumptions and that other people are entitled to have their own opinion. That doesn't mean that there's any merit to it, and that's on you to do that soul searching to figure out if there is, and to, again, be humble enough to know that we're all just imperfect people just trying to figure out and navigate this thing called life. The next virtuous characteristic that I want to talk about is compassion. And I find this is the characteristic that a lot of people think of when they think of a homemaker, the idea of a loving and nurturing woman at home that makes the house a home. And it really is true. And we all have days where we are less than perfect or moments where we just snap. But I would encourage you to strive to be compassionate even through those moments. And the goal isn't to be perfect. Again, we all have bad days where we are less than. But the goal is for, like, the overall virtue that you're striving for is to be a compassionate person. And so, for example, like a grouchy or self-serving homemaker isn't going to help anyone. And I'm saying this because lately I have been binge watching Desperate Housewives, and there is a housewife that is incredibly self-serving, and as a result, the people that are close to her end up getting really affected. Don't be like that. Don't be looking out for yourself. Be compassionate and loving towards other people, and be there for the people that need you to be there. Okay, so the last virtuous characteristic that I want to talk about is being morally just. And I find, at least when we think of a homemaker, we don't typically think of, oh, the sweet, loving, morally just homemaker. No, like we don't really have that just part, but I think it is so important. And I say this because God is a just God. He's a loving God and he's a just God. And this is shown especially with Jesus dying on the cross. Like he came down to earth, took the form of mankind, and took the punishment of all of our sins, served that what was once injustice and made it just, so that we could have an eternal life in heaven. Like, that's just and it's loving. Like, it's amazing. So, what does it mean to be just? Well, it means to be fair, to uphold a standard of righteousness. And even in the Bible, there's countless examples of justice or injustice. Take, for example, Jacob, how he favored one of his children over the rest, being Joseph. That was not just. There was a case of injustice there. Or take another example, but the opposite. When David was anointed by Samuel to be king over Saul, Saul was seeking to kill him because he didn't want to give up his throne. And David had the opportunity to kill Saul, but instead he said, nope, like I'm going to let God serve the justice. I'm going to let him take vengeance when and where he sees fit. So what's the takeaway as a Catholic homemaker? To be just, to have just morals. Don't lie to your husband. Don't favor one kid over the other. Don't shame your guests. And when an injustice act has been done, know the difference of whether God should work through you or for you. And above all else, forgive that person for doing that unjust thing to you. And to be clear, I'm not saying to reconcile with them. That's a totally different thing, which requires there to be trust. And I personally feel like God wouldn't want us to just aimlessly trust someone who has wronged us enough time where that trust needs to be earned back again. That's a totally different thing. But forgive. Let go of that thing that would bring justice to the injustice part of it all, and let God handle the rest. Let God do his wondrous works in you and in me and in everyone else. But that is all I have today. Until next time, I will see you then. Bye.